the ailing electricity company in the last weeks of December, I think. He joined a bit earlier than it was initially agreed, as Eskom was once again embarking on load shedding that began in the middle of December last year, December 13th. Load shedding that was serving to further depress the South African economy, pushing us into a recession in the first quarter of this year. Now, load shedding has been a South African feature, I think, for some 12, 13 odd years. It's been an ever-present threat to our growth prospects. Eskom's badly planned and executed expansion plans have raised debt to more than 450 odd billion rand. It's a debt problem that has been at the center of Eskom's maintenance woes, amongst many other ailments. Hello, André, and good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning, Ron. Good to meet with you.
Good. I mean, you joined Eskom towards the end of December, as I said. Coming in as this again, they were undertaking some load shedding. What a time to come in. Can you tell us a bit about your first 6 months at the helm of Eskom?
I think the first 6 months obviously have been a huge education for me. I've been very privileged to meet with a very substantial part of the Eskom staff complement, and I was very pleasantly surprised with the caliber and the quality of the people that we've got working for the utility. I think after 10 years of some really challenging times, understandably, they are somewhat demotivated and demoralized. So one of my jobs is to turn that motivation around. I've taken the time to visit a couple of power stations, to visit some of our transmission and distribution assets, and we've got work to do. We have catch-up work to do in order to improve our maintenance practices in some of our power plants, some of the older ones. We have not been doing maintenance as we should have been doing it, so there's catch-up work to do. We were able to take advantage of the lockdown to do some short-term maintenance, but there is still longer-term maintenance that we need to catch up on. So all in all, the foundations are there, but there's work to do to shore them up and to provide that base on which the South African economy can grow.
Let's go to the latest headlines around your company. And I want to explain it for readers and listeners, I guess. Are parts of Gauteng experiencing what we call load reduction or load shedding? And just what is the difference between the two?
Right, so load shedding is something that we implement when the country is experiencing as a whole greater demand than our generation assets can feed into the grid. And in order to prevent an overloading of the grid, we therefore have to throttle back demand, and that is done according to a rolling schedule, which unfortunately too many of the viewers and listeners this morning will be all too familiar with. So load reduction is done at a local level, and it is done at that level in order to safeguard our distribution assets. So those green transformer boxes that you see up on electricity poles, if these are overloaded due to illegal connections and overloading generally in a particular area, then they are prone to physically blow up, which obviously creates not only a safety hazard, but also requires us then to replace these very expensive assets at a later stage. So where we detect that the local distribution grids are overloaded, we implement load reduction in order to throttle back demand and to protect those assets. And we're not alone in doing this. Tshwane have been doing this, City of Joburg have been doing this, and all for the same reason, in order to protect those transformers and local cabling networks on the ground.
These connections, just how much of a threat is in the long term to Eskom and your infrastructure? And is it are you guys seeing a growing problem? Is it on the increase?
I think there is definitely a culmination of factors here that we have to take into account. First of all, the economic hardship that's undoubtedly been brought about by COVID-19. The lockdown, the associated loss of salaries, jobs, that clearly has had an impact on the disposable income that people use, amongst others, to pay for electricity bills. So I think that's a factor that has encouraged illegal connection. The second factor is that I don't think that the demographics are always properly taken into account when electricity networks are planned. If you look at some of the density patterns, people are renting out rooms in their backyards and so forth, and all of these rooms connecting to the same breaker that was never designed to carry more than one household, that obviously leads to additional demand and additional requirement for electricity. And then the third factor that has led to an increase in this overloading problem that we've got is the exceptionally cold winter that we've been having. It's the coldest winter in 10 years, and our generation system has been coping quite well with the challenges of this colder winter, but at a local distribution level, that is where the overloading occurs.
I guess the question of future funding needed there. And if there was no COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown that we're still in, well, coming out of now, would we still be in the middle of a season of load shedding in the country at the moment?
Look, I think it's a question of if life hands you lemons, then you better make lemonade. The very unfortunate global pandemic that struck South Africa and the world for that matter did lead to a very significant drop in demand. In some instances, during the normal peak, it went down by as much as 6,000 megawatts, about 20%, and the night minimum was down a whopping 11,000 megawatts, so huge reductions in load. And we then decided, in order to improve the availability of our system, let's start doing short-term corrective maintenance. So this is not the preventive maintenance. These were maintenance interventions designed to fix known faults that had been impacting the stability of our generation system. And we estimate that we've been able to return about 2,000 megawatts of reliable capacity by dint of carrying out this short-term maintenance during the lockdown period.
I mean, during this period, why couldn't Eskom undertake a much more grander maintenance program? Is that because generally it was unforeseen that we'd have this period of lockdown in the South African economy, so you couldn't plan ahead and perhaps do much bigger maintenance program, a much larger maintenance program?
Yeah, a couple of reasons why we were unable to do that. First of all, you're quite right. The pandemic and the lockdown were not anticipated. They were not forecast. So when this happened, we of course had to be quite nimble and agile in how we responded to it. That's the first point. The second point is that we were able to do the short-term maintenance because that does not require extended outages. To do a thorough overhaul of a boiler, you'd need to take it down for between 80 and 120 days. And that's simply not how the lockdown has been going on. Thirdly, we also need to import some international experts. And these were not able to come to South Africa. And in any event, it would have been very inadvisable for us from medical perspectives to gather large crowds of contractors and Eskom employees at a site to do intensive maintenance work while we were still in phase 1 lockdown. So from that perspective, no, it wasn't possible to do the longer term maintenance. We will start doing this from the 1st of July. We are all good to go. And then we will start doing this much needed overhauling sequentially of the various units in our generation system.
At the moment, just how big is Eskom's maintenance backlog? Just how many years of damage do you and your team have to go into and repair and get maintenance up to scratch?
So maintenance is a very funny thing. You know, if you do it regularly, you protect your asset. If you defer it, you end up borrowing from the future, but at an extortionate interest rate. And that is the position that we find ourselves in. For us to catch up will take us, when we start from the 1st of July, roughly until the end of August of next year. And we believe that by then we will have returned sufficient units to full production capacity to avoid load shedding going forward. However, during this period, when we will be carrying out this reliability maintenance program, as it's called, there will still be a risk of load shedding, as we will have to take out those units to conduct the maintenance that was left behind.
All right. So load shedding from July 1, as the economy opens up, will and the demand increases return again for maybe another year in our lives.
Ron, it's something that we want to avoid where we can, but unavoidably we have to now take out these units to do the long-term maintenance that was not done previously. And if we don't do that maintenance, then the system will become less and less reliable going forward. And what that means is that we will actually increase the risk of load shedding and far more severe load shedding if we don't intervene now and do this maintenance program. So unfortunately, this is where we are. We don't have too many choices. We have to now start doing the maintenance as required.
Well, it's the place to start off when it comes to Eskom's problems right now, the maintenance issue. I mean, it has much to do with Eskom's funding problem. Now, I know every year the South African government gives Eskom about 23 billion rand. You pay about 45 billion thereabout in interest a year and generate 40 odd billion rand in cash. Just how do you dig yourself out of this hole you are in as Eskom? Just when we look at these numbers, it seems near impossible that Eskom can grow its way either through revenues out of this situation that you're in, and get, with regard, of course, overall to that 450 billion rand debt. How does Eskom dig itself out of this hole? I guess with this financial situation, maintenance is always going to be a problem for Eskom going forward.
Absolutely, Ron. The debt is indeed the biggest challenge that Eskom faces among the many challenges that we do face. So addressing the 450 billion rands worth of debt, I think, is going to require a multi-pronged approach. I don't think there's one silver bullet that is going to fix the Eskom debt challenge. So we need to ensure that we've got operational stability. Every time that we implement load shedding, we don't generate electricity that we can sell and collect revenue. So from a business perspective, load shedding is a bad idea for Eskom because we lose revenue. So we need to fix that. We'd like to resolve our disputes that we have with the National Energy Regulator of South Africa, NERSA. There are a number of cases that are being adjudicated, and we believe that if appropriate cost-reflective tariffs that reflect a reasonable cost base, not an inflated cost base, reasonable cost base, that will go a long way to addressing our top-line challenge as well. We need to collect the debt that is owed to us. Soweto owes some 12 billion rand. Some of the defaulting municipalities owe about 28, 29 billion rand. And there's no real positive outlook towards collecting those overdue debts. Now, if we can collect those debts, obviously that will make a big difference. Yeah. The contributions that we've been receiving from National Treasury have been very important and very valuable to us. They have provided stability to our balance sheet, so those are very important also for us to address the debt challenge. But then we also have to live within our means as an organization. So we've already decided to cut back our capital expenditure very hard this year. We've implemented voluntary severance packages where we have exited 184 senior managers. And as you'll know, those are also the more expensive members of staff that we said goodbye to. We are managing our costs very tightly. So I do believe that if we pull all the levers at our disposal together with the equity contributions and resolving our regulatory challenges, that the Eskom debt situation will become more manageable. But a very high level, which makes it difficult to service and imposes a huge burden on Eskom, but also on South Africa from a risk perspective.
Now, if you were back at your previous employer, Nampak, a debt issue like the one Eskom has would perhaps warrant a rights issue or some other route to bring in fresh capital to deal with that debt. Now, with one shareholder and the government at that, how much more complicated life have you traded for in trying to solve this debt issue?
Look, I think, as I've said, we need to pull all the levers at our disposal. So we're also looking at some of our non-core assets. We have a number of properties that we believe we should put on the market. Again, not an ideal time from a property perspective, a property market perspective, to do so right now. But there are opportunities for us to do so. We have implemented a recruitment freeze, so we're not hiring more people. So by natural attrition, we will over time whittle down our staff complement. The challenge that we have, if you look back at when the three mega projects, Medupi, Kusile, and the Ngula pumped storage scheme, were conceived, the idea was that Eskom would be able to fund these off its own balance sheet and then repay the debt from revenue raised. Now, some of those assumptions revolved around economic growth rates and how quickly demand for electricity would grow. It revolved around a certain tariff dispensation that would be applicable. But I think it's fair to say that where Eskom is right now, the equity injections that we receive are what would have been applied. It's the state-owned enterprise equivalent, I guess, of a rights issue, is if you have an overgeared balance sheet that you need an equity injection.
Yeah. Now we've known for years that Eskom is overstaffed, but your shareholder tells you no one can be retrenched, but you say under the VSP, you lost about 200 odd senior managers in that VSP program. With the staff, I think sitting around 46,000 people, actually, last annual report. Ideally, like how many people should be employed at Eskom? I know former chairman Jabu Mabuza said perhaps 33% too many people employed at the moment at Eskom.
So the current headcount right now is sitting at 44,000. So the numbers keep on coming down. There was a report issued by the World Bank that started a narrative that Eskom had 30,000 too many employees. We have done some extensive benchmarking and some extensive checking with comparable organizations, including both transmission, distribution, and not only looking at the generation part of the business, and also looking at the very large geography that we require to serve across South Africa. And we think that a number of between 36 and 38,000 members of staff is probably the right number. And that, incidentally, is where we were around about 2014, when governance started to become, shall I say, a bit weaker at Eskom.
I'll honor this philosophical question, but I don't think the finance minister is anywhere near this position to do this for you. But if the finance minister, Tito Mboweni, tomorrow could write a check of, say, 100-odd billion rand, just what would you do with it? What would be your first priority if that level of injection were to come into Eskom? Well, this is all just wishful thinking at the moment, given the country's fiscal and economic constraints.
I think the first and most urgent priority for us is to stabilize our balance sheet, and therefore paying down high interest debt would be the way to start. The burden on our income statement as a consequence of the debt burden that we carry, to the point that you made earlier, we pay in net finance cost. With other words, the interest as well as the amortization. Obviously, we also collect cash from various sources. but our debt service cost net amounts to about 28, 29 billion rand per annum. So you can do a very good job managing the business up until the operating profit line or EBIT line. But when you start to add debt service cost and amortization, it becomes extremely difficult to deliver a net profit. And therefore, I think addressing the balance sheet is a very important priority for us.
To Eskom's other cost pressures that we haven't touched on here, the price of coal. Why does the cost of coal keep rising for Eskom, even in environments where internationally coal prices are falling, and locally you are the only game in town really when it comes to coal? But why does that cost of coal keeping a problem for Eskom?
Yeah, it is one of the buckets that we are looking at, is to reduce our cost of procurement, and in particular what we call primary energy cost. When you build a power station, you build it as close as possible to the mine that will supply it with coal. But obviously, as life of the power station progresses, the coal gets mined out because it's by definition a wasting resource. And the coal has to be transported over longer and longer distances. What you also find is that the coal becomes more expensive to extract, because simply from a net present value perspective, what any right-thinking coal miner will do is to mine the best reserves first and leave the difficult, more challenging reserves for later. So that is what has also happened to us as our coal reserves have been extracted. There's also a very interesting phenomenon, is that the world of international coal exports has changed very significantly. South Africa used to be an exporter of coal to Europe in a very large way, but that market has essentially disappeared. It was a very demanding market and demanded a high quality of coal. Today, what we find is that Eskom's power station coal competes with coal that gets exported to India and other countries in Asia. And that causes us to have to compete with an export alternative, as opposed to just making use of the so-called middlings that were left behind once the export fraction had been washed out and exported. So the competitive forces have changed. The reserves have changed, and of course the cost base for mining has also changed. And part of that is to do with import of capital equipment due to a weaker exchange rate, inadequate capitalization of mines, above inflation, wage increases, and so forth.
Right. Heading back a bit, about staff, I was just thinking about that last wage negotiation before your time, where Eskom kind of cornered into agreeing an 8% increase under, let's be too nice, under some form of duress. Can Eskom continue with such increases? Can you renegotiate first to that last 8% wage offer, by the way? And going forward, just when it comes to the rate of wage increases at Eskom, has to not be almost a new compact drawn between yourselves and unions, just given the current state of Eskom's finances?
Yeah. So let me address the existing wage agreement first. As far as we are concerned, a deal is a deal, so we won't go back on that deal. We will honor and respect that deal. Where I've engaged with the labor unions, and I've done so now on a number of occasions with both local union representation as well as with the national leadership, I found a very mature and rational approach to the challenges that confront Eskom. Clearly, the unions have a constituency which they have to represent and that they have to respect. I understand that. I can get my head around that. But very clearly also the unions understand that the milk cow is now at the point of being dry, and we now need to figure out ways to address our cost base. And I have found very good support from union members, for example, on cost-saving ideas. We run an advice platform. It's called Advice for André, and we've had more than 900 suggestions already. And a large proportion of those come from union members who actually want to make a contribution because they know where in this particular battle that we have to fight as Eskom to become a profitable entity again, I definitely regard unions as an ally, and I think we've built up a reasonably good relationship with them so far.
Now, I guess another big elephant in the room every time a discussion like Eskom comes about, given its history in the past decade on state capture, corruption, and like, I guess we're all frustrated that so few people have been arrested around that era. With regards to recovering that stolen money from Eskom over the years, just how far along is that process? Is that something that you, as CEO, are close to, or is it something you've left to the board to handle, just like in recouping all those billions lost to corruption in that institution?
It is something that I'm personally very close to. I believe that where money was unlawfully paid, that we should go and recover it. Eskom has been successful in the past. There was the 1 billion rand recovered from McKinsey. We're in the process of recovering funds from McKinsey's BEE partner Trillion. We have recovered 171 million rand from Deloitte. We have issued a letter of demand to PwC for 95 million rand. We've identified some other former employees against whom we will be instituting claims, and there's more to come. We are definitely not going to stop trying to recover money that left Eskom unlawfully, and we've got strong teams of lawyers and accountants working on this, and where we've got a good case, we will go after those and we'll get our money back.
Now here's to, I guess, a bit of a more philosophical question about maybe more management style question about managing Eskom in your style. And how do you, I mean, I've heard quite a few stories told about the whole Eskom juggernaut, right? How do you balance, I guess, the power dynamics that CEOs have struggled with before with Eskom, with managing Eskom's megawatt park and its own politics and those of the different politics that exist in those coal-fired power stations across Mpumalanga, where there exists another sort of ecosystem that's away from megawatt park, but just has its own intricacies. How do you almost manage the power dynamics between these two at points competing forces, and that makes managing Eskom such a monstrous, a big headache for any man?
Look, it is a very large organization. You know, if you look at across Eskom, if you just look at the property portfolio, if that property portfolio were listed, we'd be the second biggest listed property company on the JSE. So we are a very large company with a very large asset base. We've got our own insurance company. We've got our own home loan company. So there's a lot of different challenges that you need to communicate, and I think that word is the operative one, is communicate. I try and communicate a lot, and also communicate a consistent message about what my priorities are, drive that through the management team, make sure that the management team are aligned, but then also ensure that I can go onto the shop floor and talk to people and engage with them, because that is clearly where the rubber hits the road, and where, as I've said, a number of surprising insights sometimes arise from. So is it a tough job? Absolutely. Is it an all-consuming job? Absolutely. Weekends don't have a lot of meaning, but I think we are making progress. We are able to rely on a core of Eskom employees who are deeply loyal, deeply committed, and deeply engaged in the successful future of this company. And once you've got that persuasion and you can tap into that as an asset, you've already got more than half the battle won. So I'm encouraged. It's a tough job, but it's not an impossible job.
to your newest coal-fired power stations, your newest fleets, I mean, Medupi and Kusile, I mean, design defects at these power stations, I mean, just how much do you think it will cost to get them fully operational? Where would you get the sort of the funding to get them fully operational and get these two? I mean, these are massive investments that the country has made over the past decade. Sorry there.
Okay, sorry, we just lost sound there for a minute. We've identified the design defects that have bedeviled achieving full operational capacity at Medupi. Now, we've had to fix the milling plant, and it's been quite an extensive exercise. Now, where we were quite pleased, we implemented in April, we implemented a shutdown of Medupi Unit 3 for 75 days. There was a certain energy journalist and commentator who said that we would never achieve 75 days, so he still owes us a hat that he has to consume at some point in time. I'll gladly provide condiments for him to do that. We then brought that unit back online, and it achieved for the first time ever its full capacity of 793 megawatts. So these modifications still need to be tested and trialed and confirmed that they are in fact now those that are required to get these units operational, but we haven't waited for that. We've now rolled over that same mod process to Unit 6. That's been brought back and it's operating quite well right now. So I think we've put our finger on what the technical challenges are, and we're fixing them. It costs, to your question, about 300 million rand per boiler to do. So this is a very expensive exercise.
Yeah.
And your alternative, if you don't spend the money, of course, then you sit with a new build plant that is fundamentally not delivering what it was designed to do. We are engaging with a contractor to establish the liability for having to pay for these fixes. But from where we were, in order to get going on
coal-fired power stations, are some as old as 50 years, if not some older. When should we start building the next power station already? I mean, outside of what we think of now, whether it's nuclear or even coal, and if we ever get if we ever get to 3% growth a year, Eskom will not be able to provide the electricity. And when should the nation start then building the next station? And should we ever, I guess, the question here, trust Eskom to do it again?
I think the answer to that question is contained in the 2019 version of the Integrated Resource Plan, which clearly spells out which of the power stations are going to be put into retirement over the next decade. It's between 8,000 and 12,000 megawatts of capacity. So to your point, you're absolutely right. We need to find generating capacity to replace that. There are a number of ideas how to achieve that and how to enable that. The proposed restructuring of Eskom into 3 different subsidiaries in order to allow more competition and more private investment into the generation space. That is one of the first and key elements to bring on additional generation capacity. There are various inquiries. You made reference to the inquiry recently issued by the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy on nuclear. So that's a policy matter, and once the department has established the responses to its inquiry, then we will obviously engage further with them. There's also an initiative where we have approached the market as Eskom to understand if there is an opportunity for us to repurpose some of our old power stations, possibly convert them to natural gas, possibly use some of the vacant land where we have rehabilitated open cast mines around our power stations, put up wind turbines, solar panels there. So I think it's going to be a multitude of different solutions. there will have to be some mid-merit type of generation capacity in order to give the base load. But over time, I think the energy industry in South Africa is going to transition far more into a renewable space, solar and wind in particular, and we will see far more private investment coming into the generation space, which of course is good. It is foreign direct investment into South Africa. It creates jobs. It stimulates local economies. What we have to ensure that as this transition takes place, that we don't leave the communities that have invested generations of their lives into coal mining and coal-fired power stations, that we don't leave them in the lurch. So this notion of a just energy transition is quite an important one in order for us to make that transition into a new generation fleet that has a lesser reliance on coal.
Are you at all worried about Eskom losing its single buyer status in these new in the Eskom reform and the restructuring of Eskom that are currently underway?
No, I'm not particularly worried about it. I think the president and then subsequently also the Minister of Minerals and Energy have already indicated that municipalities, for example, will be able to enter into contracts directly with IPPs. There will obviously have to be a wheeling charge if the IPP is located in the Northern Cape and the municipality is located in the Western Cape. Somehow the electricity still needs to get from source to consumer, and that network, that transmission grid, is owned and operated by Eskom, so there will have to be a wheeling charge. But I think the principle has been very clearly set out by the President and the Minister that there will be more than one buyer going forward, and in particular those municipalities of good standing.
Coming as a final question, and thanks so much for joining us this morning. I mean, I guess you have many things on your table: debts, the costs, the labor costs, and the like. Last, I guess the most important thing for everyone's wondering is the structuring of Eskom into those three entities you spoke about early on. Where are you on these discussions? And if you were to give us a crystal ball, an analysis of this, when could we see that final restructuring of Eskom into three different entities? And why do you, and almost explain to us, why is that the best way forward for Eskom as an operating company?
So I think if you look at trends in the energy industry and the electricity industry in particular across the world, the days of the vertically integrated monolithic utility like an Eskom are really behind us, and we are increasingly seeing, particularly in Europe, and that's what we base much of our own energy policy on, we're increasingly seeing a separation into generation, transmission, and distribution. And this is to ensure that you can have a level playing field in generation, attract more private investment without fear that they will be compromised by having to compete against the utility, the single buyer's own assets, so that there is transparency and equity in decision making as to which energy producer is going to get the bid for that particular day, and what the hierarchy will be of those bids. So transmission is a natural monopoly. You will never build two transmission networks. You won't build two power lines running next to each other, competing with each other. That doesn't make much economic sense. So I think that is an asset for the country. I don't see that selling that, for example, would be a particularly good idea for the country. And then distribution, we already have competition in distribution where certain municipalities distribute and Eskom distribute. So Eskom sells electricity into Sandton, and the city of Joburg sells into other parts of the city. So there are various models here that we need to pursue. We have set up three independent divisions now. They are increasingly starting to operate. They've each had a board appointed. The boards have each met a number of times already, and I think it's been a very effective structure. And that is the precursor to setting them up as legal subsidiaries under the umbrella of Eskom Holdings. We have commenced internal energy trading, so our transmission business, in which the buying office today is housed, is already trading electricity with power stations and trading electricity also internationally, selling to international customers, but also buying, in particular from Mozambique. And that is how eventually the grid should be operating, is that there will be a number of different generation providers. They will bid into a pool, contracts will be awarded, and the system will then be managed in a way that enables us to supply electricity. And in view of the fact that we are going to have less coal-fired generation capacity going forward, we need to structure ourselves in such a way that we can attract that private investment to come in and compete and give us the most effective way of generating electricity in South Africa. And that is why we are having to separate into these three entities, set ourselves up to enable this new era of electricity generation in South Africa by allowing new entrants into the business.
André, thank you so much for joining us. Even that was an excellent interview. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ron. Have a good day.
Good day. Same to you. I'm Ruyter, Eskom CEO, on the future of the company. Thank you.